My name is Chuck Altvater. I'm the Professional Development Unit Chief here in the Fire and Life Safety section of DFPC. And today I'm bringing you a short training on the 2021 International Fire Code, which, as you probably already know, DFPC adopted as the fire code for all public schools in Colorado effective July 1st of this year. So as you're out doing fire inspections in schools in your district this year, you should be inspecting to the 2021 IFC regardless of what your locally adopted codes are. We have several items on our agenda and we're going to go ahead and get started now.
First topic we're going to be looking at in this training is storage, and looking at section 315.3.1 ceiling clearance states that storage shall be maintained 2 feet or more below the ceiling in non-sprinklered areas of buildings and not less than 18 inches below sprinkler head deflectors in sprinklered areas of buildings. There are 2 exceptions to this rule, and the first says that the 2-foot ceiling clearance is not required for storage along walls in non-sprinklered areas of buildings. And the second exception states that the 18-inch ceiling clearance is not required for storage along walls in areas of buildings equipped with an automatic sprinkler system. The reason for these 2 exceptions is that in the case of the 2-foot ceiling clearance, that space is required to be maintained to allow firefighting crews to direct hose streams over the top of storage at the seat of a fire, which may be deeper in the room, and it's understood that storage along walls doesn't interfere with hose streams. In the case of the 18-inch ceiling clearance rule, it's long been recognized in NFPA 13 that cabinets can go all the way to the ceiling and they don't interfere with the development of sprinkler protection. So NFPA changed a cycle ago to allow storage along walls to go to the ceiling as well, recognizing that storage on shelving is no different than storage within cabinets. An exception to that would be if there's a sprinkler head along the wall, then they have to maintain the 18 inches below that sprinkler head along the wall. And as we all know, sprinkler heads can be as close as 4 inches to a wall, and so that may be something you see. One caution on storage here, though, is remember that by definition, storage is no deeper than 30 inches. So if they're using a shelf that's 48 inches deep or something of that nature, now we're getting the other provisions of the code beyond general storage. This leads to a question we get about classroom storage, and that is it permissible for items to be stored on top of cabinets in classrooms? And looking at 315.3.1, yes, it's permissible for storage on top of cabinets in classrooms. In fact, that storage can go all the way to the ceiling. One note of caution on that, though, is understand the difference between storage and the accumulation of combustible waste. So if you see items on top of cabinets that are used in the classroom, maybe they've got some storage bins full of supplies, or they've got textbooks stacked up, or they've got glassware or display items that are used in the classroom, that is indeed storage. However, if they have piles of cardboard boxes or maybe some waste paper, old butcher paper, or paper mache art projects that have been sitting up there accumulating dust for a long time, now we're starting to look more at combustible waste than we are storage, and we need to have that corrected. One other note of caution on that is, remember, storage is only 30 inches deep, so if they're using an area on top of a closet or a restroom in maybe a kindergarten classroom that's 4 feet deep and probably has a sprinkler inside of it, but it's deeper than 30 inches, they can only use the 30 inches against the wall for storage. The remainder of that would not be able to be used for storage. And the last thing I have to say about storage is combustible materials shall not be stored in boiler rooms, mechanical rooms, electrical equipment rooms, fire command centers, elevator machine rooms, lobbies, or elevator cars. The next thing we're going to be looking at in this training is electricity in the classroom. And the first part of that is going to be Section 603.5, relocatable power taps and current taps. There's 2 new definitions in the 21 IFC, and the first is relocatable power tap. You see an example of that on the left side of your screen. And a relocatable power tap is an electrical enclosure that provides one or more receptacle outlets, and that is provided with an attached power supply cord and an attachment plug for connection to a permanently installed receptacle outlet. I think most of us would refer to this as a power strip. And on the right side of your screen, you see a current tap. I think most of us would probably call this a multi-plug adapter. But the definition is that an electrical device that, where connected to permanently installed receptacle outlet, provides multiple receptacle outlet configurations. The code also specifically states that relocatable power taps will be listed in accordance with UL 1363, and that current taps will be listed in accordance with UL 498. Their application and use also states that they will be plugged directly into a permanently installed receptacle, so these cannot be plugged into extension cords. And extension cords shall not be a substitute for permanent wiring, and the code also states that they will be listed in accordance with UL 817. Extension cords shall not be affixed to structures, extended through walls, ceilings, or floors, nor under doors or floor coverings, and nor shall such cords be subject to environmental damage or physical impact. Extension cords shall only be used with portable appliances, and cords marked for indoor use shall not be used outdoors, although cords marked for outdoor use may be used either indoors or out. Their application use states that extension cords shall be plugged directly into an approved receptacle, relocatable power tap, or current tap, and except for approved multi-plug extension cords, shall serve only one portable appliance. Word of caution here, you look at the ampacity of extension cords and of the relocatable power taps to make sure they're not overloading these devices by plugging in multiple portable appliances that then cause it to draw more amperage than it's rated for. And yes, you heard that correctly. Extension cords are permitted to be plugged into relocatable power taps and current taps. Extension cords shall be maintained in good condition without splices, deterioration, or damage. Okay, so take a look when you're outside. Make sure those extension cords that are outside are not being sun damaged or damaged by heating and cooling in the wintertime. If a device is a grounded device, then they have to use a grounded extension cord. They cannot adapt a grounded device into a non-grounded extension cord. And that leads us into our last topic under electricity, and that is temporary wiring. Temporary wiring for electrical power and lighting installations shall not exceed a period of 90 days, and this includes holiday lights. Temporary wiring methods shall meet the applicable provisions of NFPA 70, and there's an exception here that allows lighting to extend beyond the 90 days if it's being used to provide light for construction, remodeling, repair, or demolition of buildings during that period. Temporary wiring must be attached to a structure in such a way as to protect it from physical damage, and it must be supported by insulators no greater than 10 feet apart. If teachers want to achieve this holiday lighting look on a more permanent basis, they can install permanent LED lighting, but they have to be installed in accordance with NFPA 70. Next, we're going to talk about emergency evacuation drills. This is section 405 of the IFC, and table 405.3 still requires Group E occupancies to conduct a monthly fire and evacuation drill of all occupants of the building. The purpose of the fire evacuation drill is to give the occupants the experience of evacuating the building, of going to their assembly points, and of using exits that they may be required to use during an emergency. Another change in section 405 is it states that lockdown plan drills shall be conducted in accordance with the approved lockdown plan, and that such drills shall not be substituted for fire and evacuation drills. So that's something you can point to when school administrators are complaining that they want to substitute a lockdown drill for a fire drill. It says right there in section 405 that that is not permitted. One
One other change in section 405 is the time for fire drills. It used to be a note in table 405.3 that the fire code official could modify the frequency of fire drills. And while we still expect fire drills to be conducted at unexpected times and under varying conditions that simulate, those unusual conditions that may occur during an evacuation, we do want to take into account weather and in severe climates, the fire code official has the authority to modify the emergency evacuation drill termination points and the frequency. Modifying termination points means you can authorize the school to evacuate to just outside the doors as opposed to going all the way across the ball field to their assembly points. Modifying frequency means basically if the weather's bad and it's anticipated to be bad and the school had planned on doing their fire drill in the last week of the month and the weather reports say it's going to be 10 degrees and high winds for the next week or so, you can go ahead and give them an extension until that storm has passed. We'd much rather see them do a fire drill on a bluebird day than on a day when it's 10 degrees with 45-mile-an-hour winds. As far as record keeping goes for fire drills, nothing's changed there. You still need to identify the person who's conducting the fire drill, the date and time of the drill, the notification method used for the fire drill, and I do want to point out that it's required that if they have a fire alarm system, that is used to initiate the fire drill. They need to note the employees on duty and participating in the drill, the number of occupants who were evacuated, any special conditions that were simulated. For example, they may close off one exit at a wing to simulate that that's where the fire is or that part of the building has collapsed. Whatever the case may be, they need to go ahead and note that they've simulated any special conditions. Any problems they encounter during the fire drill. I mean, this is a learning event, and they should, if they encounter any problems, make a note of that so that they can overcome that with the next fire drill. They should note the weather conditions on the day of the fire drill and the time required to accomplish a complete evacuation of the building. Moving on, we're going to talk about lockdown plans. I did touch on this briefly during fire and evacuation drills, but section 404.2.3 states that lockdown plans shall only be permitted where such plans have been approved by the fire code official and are in compliance with this code. What that means is as the school is developing its lockdown plan with law enforcement, they also need to submit a copy of that plan to the fire code official to ensure that they're meeting all the requirements of the IFC for egress and accessibility. That plan actually needs to include 11 things, and we're going to run through those 11 things real quick. Number one is identification of the individuals authorized to issue a lockdown order. We know that in most schools it's going to be the principal, the vice principal, and there's probably going to be a handful of other people in each school who are authorized to initiate that lockdown order. Some schools may authorize every teacher to initiate a lockdown order. Number two, security measures used during normal operations when the building is occupied that could adversely affect egress or fire department operations. Number three, a description of identified emergency and security threats addressed by the plan, including specific lockdown procedures to be implemented for each threat condition. Now, not every lockdown is the same and one size doesn't fit all. Different threat conditions that may face a school are an intruder within the school, a person on the grounds or perhaps in the vicinity of the school who poses a threat but is not within the school. We live in Colorado, so a security threat on school may very well be a bear or a mountain lion on campus. Some schools are located near highways or near railroads and may have lockdown procedures for hazmat situations that occur near the school. Number four is the means and methods of initiating a lockdown plan for each threat, and that's broken into 4 subparts. 4.1 is a means of notifying the occupants of the lockdown event, and this needs to be different from the fire alarm signal. We want people, when they hear the fire alarm, to go outside. We want them, when they hear the lockdown order, to stay where they are or return to their classroom or whatever the procedure is for that particular type of lockdown. 4.2 is identification of each door or other access point that will be secured. 4.3 is a description of the means or methods used to secure doors and access points. And 4.4 is a description of how those locking means and methods are in compliance with the IFC for egress and accessibility. Number 5 is procedures for reporting to the fire department any lockdown condition affecting egress or fire department operations. Is it a 911 call? Is it something more automated than that? What are the procedures that school is going to use to notify the fire department that there is a lockdown condition? Number 6, procedures for determining and reporting the presence or absence of occupants to emergency response agencies during a lockdown. Schools need to know which classrooms are being used. Are there students in the auditorium or in the cafeteria at that time? And are they locking down there, or are they back in their classroom? Number 7, providing a two-way communication between a central location in each area subject to being secured during a lockdown. So a lot of schools have intercom systems. Others have hardwired phone systems that go between different areas. Some schools may not have that. They may be relying on cell phone communications or radio communications from a central location to, say, each classroom or to the cafeteria or perhaps the coach's office out in the locker room building. They need to provide a means for that two-way communication. And they need to identify with that central location. Usually it's going to be the office of the school, but it may be the security office or it may be another location on campus that remains accessible during a lockdown situation. Number 8 is identification of the prearranged signal for terminating the lockdown. Everyone needs to know what the all clear sounds like. Number 9 is identification of the individuals authorized to issue a lockdown termination order. And this list will almost certainly be different from that list in number 1, the list of individuals authorized to initiate a lockdown order. Where some schools may have every teacher in the school on that list who can authorize a lockdown order, they may only allow the principal or vice principal to terminate that lockdown order. It should be a much smaller list than a number 1. Number 10, procedures for unlocking and verifying that the means of egress have been returned to normal operations upon termination of that lockdown. So not only are they going to provide the procedure for unlocking those doors, they're also going to provide the procedure for verifying that it's been done. It's one thing to say, well, the janitor is going to go through and unlock all the doors. What happens if the janitor forgets a door? Or what happens if something else comes up and an access point gets overlooked? There needs to be a method in their plan for verifying that the means of egress has been returned to its normal operations. And finally, number 11, training procedures and frequency of lockdown plan drills. And like I said during the fire and evacuation drill portion of this training, this also goes on to explicitly say yet again that lockdown plan drills are to be executed in accordance with the approved plan and that they shall not be substituted for fire and evacuation drills. When it says in accordance with the approved plan, lockdown drills may not be monthly. They may be quarterly or semi-annually, or maybe they're every other month. It's going to be up to the school and law enforcement to determine the frequency that they want to conduct those drills. The plan, once it's been created and approved by the fire code official, needs to be maintained. So at least annually it needs to be updated, and more often if necessary due to staff changes, occupancy changes, or maybe the building physical layout changes. Some examples there might be that the principal moves on to a new school and there's a new principal. So that list of individuals who can authorize a lockdown or a termination needs to be updated. The occupancy might change. There might be a daycare center or a health clinic that opens within the school, and that's going to change the plan. Or the physical arrangement of the building might change in that in the spring there was one building, and over the summer they built a second building. So in the fall, that plan should look different than it did in the spring. Maybe they added some modular buildings, or the new gym opened. Whatever the case may be, it does need to be updated whenever something changes. It needs to be available to the fire code official for review. So every time they make that change, they should be submitting a copy of the lockdown plan to the fire code official to be reviewed. And once again, you're ensuring that it meets the requirements of the IFC for means of egress and for accessibility. Next, I'm going to talk about interior finish requirements for e-occupancies. And the most frequent question we get in regards to interior finishes is, are painted ceiling tiles allowed? And the short answer is yes, they are, as long as the school maintains the appropriate interior finish for the area of the school where those painted ceiling tiles are located. Table 803.3 indicates that Group E occupancies are required to maintain certain interior finishes based on different parts of the building, and that they get a greater allowance for interior finish if they're sprinklered versus non-sprinklered. So as you go through Section 803 of the International Fire Code, it's incumbent on the school to show you that the paints they're using on those ceiling tiles meet the flame spread index for the various classes of finish. One example here where there's a difference is in a non-sprinklered school, corridors, as well as enclosures for exit access stairways and ramps, must maintain a Class B or greater finish. And in a sprinklered building, those same areas only have to be a Class C finish. If you're not familiar with what Class A, B, and C finishes are, these numbers indicate basically that Class A finish is less combustible than a Class C finish. Everything burns eventually, we all know that, but if the flame spread index is 0 to 25, it meets the requirements for a Class A finish. If it's 26 to 75, it meets the requirements for a Class B finish, and if it's 76 to 200, it meets the requirements for a Class C finish. All finishes have a smoke development index of 0 to 450, and these are all been tested to meet ASTM standard E84. So bottom line is, yes, painted ceiling tiles are permitted, provided that the materials they use to paint those tiles meet those finish requirements. There is a thickness exemption for interior finishes, and if the coating or the paint they're using on those ceiling tiles is less than 0.036 inches, and that's 0.9 millimeters, then that material doesn't have to be tested. Related to interior finish is the use of combustible decorative materials in classrooms. Things like curtains, draperies, fabric hangings, and other combustible decorations suspended from walls or ceilings, they need to comply with Section 807.3. And 807.3 just says that those items need to meet the testing requirements of NFPA 701 or NFPA 289. And that these materials shall not exceed 10% of the specific wall or ceiling area to which they're attached. This would include things like curtains or draperies that cover a whiteboard or a cupboard area, as well as these blue cloth filters that you find in a lot of classrooms attached to the ceiling. Again, those materials cannot exceed 10% of that specific wall or ceiling area. That 10% limit doesn't apply to curtains or draperies or other fabric hangings that are used to cover windows. So don't count those in that 10%. In a similar vein, Section 807.5.2.2 talks about artwork in corridors. Artwork in corridors and teaching materials are limited to 20% of the wall area in the corridor. And the next section down from that, 807.5.2.3, says that artwork and teaching materials in classrooms are limited to no more than 50% of the specific wall area to which they're attached. Another item that's a change, and this first appeared in the 2018 edition, is locking arrangements for doors in educational occupancies. Some of you will recall that we had these in our state rules before they were added to the International Fire Code, and now that they're part of the IFC, they're no longer in our state rules. Locking arrangements for educational occupancies includes Group E occupancies, Group B educational occupancies like colleges, and Group I4 occupancies, which are daycare centers. Egress doors from classrooms, offices, and other occupied rooms that are built with locking arrangements designed to keep intruders out of the room need to comply with 4 conditions, and we're going to run through these 4 conditions real quick for you. The first is that the door shall be capable of being unlocked from outside the room with a key or other approved means. This allows rescue or security forces to enter the room once it's safe to do so. The next condition is that the door shall be openable from within the room in accordance with 1010.2. And what section 1010.2 says is that it has to be able to be opened in a single motion without a key or any special knowledge. The third condition is that modifications shall not be made to listed panic hardware, fire door hardware, or door closers. So this precludes a lot of the aftermarket locks that you see advertised on the internet. Things like fire hoses or boxes that go over the arms of the door closer. Anything that requires a second motion or special knowledge to unlock, and anything that somehow changes or modifies that panic hardware or fire door hardware. And the fourth condition is that any modifications to fire door assemblies shall be in accordance with NFPA 80. Those listed fire doors have to be maintained with their fire door rating. So drilling holes into fire doors or into fire door frames will nullify that listing. And the final thing when it comes to locking arrangements in educational occupancies is that remote locking and unlocking of doors from an approved location shall be permitted in addition to the unlocking operation item 1. So if you recall, that unlocking operation item 1 was that it had to be able to be unlocked from outside the room with a key or other approved method. In addition to that, the security office or the office for the school may be able to remotely lock and unlock those doors. The last thing we're going to talk about doors in this training is delayed egress. Section 1010.2.13 talks about delayed egress and says that they're permitted to be installed on doors serving the following occupancies in buildings that are equipped throughout with an automatic sprinkler system or an approved automatic smoke and heat detection system. Now that includes groups B, F, I, M, R, S, and U occupancies. But for the first time, it also includes Group E classrooms that have an occupant load of 50 or less. The final topic for this training is carbon monoxide detection. Section 915.2.3, Group E occupancies, states that carbon monoxide detectors shall be installed in classrooms in Group E occupancies. Carbon monoxide alarm signals shall be automatically transmitted to an on-site location that is staffed by school personnel. The exception to this rule is for Group E occupancies with an occupant load of 30 or less. Those carbon monoxide alarm signals are not required to be automatically transmitted to an on-site location. These requirements are also reflected in Chapter 11, which specifies the requirements for existing buildings. And Section 1103.9, carbon monoxide detection, states that carbon monoxide detection shall be installed in classrooms in Group E occupancies. There are some exceptions to this rule, and the two that apply to Group E occupancies are exception number 1. Carbon monoxide alarms are permitted to be solely battery operated where the code that was in effect at the time of construction did not require carbon monoxide detectors to be provided. And the third exception, a carbon monoxide detection system installed in accordance with 915.5 shall be an acceptable alternative to carbon monoxide alarms. I hope you find this training useful as you go out and do your annual school fire maintenance inspections. If you have any questions in regards to any of these topics or other topics, please give me a call. My phone number is 303-912-9469, or shoot me an email at chuck.altvater@state.co.us, and stay safe out there. Thank you.